Good morning and welcome again to Kenny Cars and Coffee, where today I'm going to touch on some of the most asked questions of suspension handling, suspension geometry. But first, let's do some tidy up things. William asked what sort of safety equipment I would recommend for the occasional track day. Well, first and foremost, a good helmet. And make sure it's got a current Snell reading. Every driving group has a different requirement for Snell, but obviously that's the first important thing. As you start out, just having a good seat belt. Important thing is brake pads and brake fluid. You need to have the right brake pads for the track and high temperature brake fluids so you don't boil your fluid and end up with no brakes. Something else that I always recommend, and people might think it's odd for safety, is a good set of driving gloves. And the reason is, I've taught a lot of people over the years, usually people that don't do many track days or the first couple of track days, you look at their hands and they're doing like a death grip on the steering wheel. Having gloves on help reduce the stress in your hands so your hands don't get tired by the end of the session. So I strongly recommend that. And then as you start progressing through, then I would suggest like a harness belt, which is over the shoulder, and we've got some of those in one click. It's pretty easy because you need to be focused on driving and not trying to brace yourself moving around the car. And another thing is you start getting into intermediate class, driving shoes. You're going to say, well, I got my tennies. They work good. Well, yeah, except for the thing about driving shoes is they got a really, really thin sole. And by having that thin sole, you get a lot better feel on your pedals. I call them my dancing shoes. Every time I go on track, I put my dancing shoes on. So from a safety standpoint, that's where you start. And then after you start moving up after the harness belt, you might want to consider a seat, because the last thing you want to do is be wallowing around in your seat trying to brace yourself with your leg. So, okay, moving on. Lon asked, what size sway bar do I prefer? Well, don't prefer any sway bar at all. With the track kit, the rear grip kit, we do not use a rear sway bar. The reason for that, a sway bar is nothing more than a torsion bar. A torsion bar is a spring. That's why you add a sway bar to the front, and the handling improves because actually increasing rear front roll stiffness with increasing spring rate. In the back, with what I do with the geometry, I don't want to add any more spring to it because we handle the spring in the shocks, springs on the shocks. I don't want a sway bar because that's going to give me an unmeasured spring rate. So we just eliminate that. I use the geometry and the springs to throw the rear sway bar away. Cliff with an FR500 has a number of handling issues that I don't have enough information to go into that, so I suggest that you set up like a 15-minute consult with me, and I can go through and find out more about what your car is doing and the pieces and parts you got on it. But I'm going to use this to lead into something. Notebooks. Now, this is a notebook from it's backwards. This is a notebook from the 2009 Mustang Challenge for the number 45 car FR500S of Ben Crosland. And what you're going to see is a bunch of dividers. I strongly recommend that you get a notebook. You keep all the information about your car in a notebook. You have a divider for every single track event you go to, and you keep all your data in there. Even things like when you go to a track you haven't been to before, write down the hotels. You maybe got one hotel that's crappy and there's another one that's better. Write that down. Where the parts stores is, where the local dealerships are, just so you have all that information at hand. And then you keep all your data. You start, when you get your tire temperatures, your tire pressures, any other notes you want to make, because the next time you go back to that track, then you just open that page up, and there you're going to have your starting cold pressure, so you don't have to start from scratch. So we'll get into more notebooks in the 5-day course, but everybody needs to have a notebook. If you don't have one, go get one with lots of dividers because you want one for every single event. Okay, what else do we have? who all do we have out there? I mean, our numbers seem to be growing every week. So let us know who's out there and what kind of cars you're driving. Don't forget to sign up for the Speech Therapy Society, because that's where we're going to do the free 5-day workshop on transforming your driving experience. And there should be a link coming up so you can sign on to that. And invite your friends and buddies. Good example, we just need to send a thank you out to Mike Charles, who's invited a whole bunch of the Saleen guys, and we're really happy to see you here. As you all know, Saleen race cars have a very special point in my heart. And actually, Mike Charles has acquired both of the '86 Saleen race cars, he brought them by, and I just I hadn't seen those cars for years. And those are the 2 cars we built from scratch. Let's see, what else do we have? Mark Kokobon asked, and Mark's a really good customer and a good guy, and we're having troubles with the plater. We'll have your parts to you soon. But he asked about how can you do an alignment when you don't have an alignment rack? I got a trick. This is a very extremely sophisticated piece of equipment. This is a plain old level, and this is a digital angle meter. You can easily use this to figure what your camber is, and you can build it yourself, keep it in your toolbox. So there's an easy trick for the track to check camber. And as far as caster, well, we talked about that before. You put all the caster it takes. You don't have to worry about checking caster. And then I believe it's Longacre that might have things called toe plates that kind of go on the outside of the tires, and you can check your toe. It's not super precise, but it's better than nothing. Let's see, what else do we have here? Tim Tomaszak, I really want to thank you for posting pictures of the rear grip kit and those kind words about just how darn good the thing works, which it really does. So, and we're going to get into that. Actually, the rear grip kit, and we use that to talk about geometry today. So let's see, with all that out of the way, I should mention the 5-day Transform Your Driving Experience workshop. It's going to be 1 hour each evening, Monday through Friday, 7:30 Eastern. You can sign up on the Speed Therapy Society group, and it'll be recorded for people that can't see it live. So in the Speed Therapy Society. And if you would like to attend but are not a Facebook person, get a hold of Carrie. She's working on ways that you can do that. And a little later on, I'll give you more of the curricular. But today's subject is grip handling suspension geometry. Suspension geometry, well, let's see, handling. Good handling just boils down to having a full package. The right geometry, spring, shocks, wheels, tires, brakes. That is how you improve handling. But asking me about handling is such a huge, huge question. It's really hard to define the individual parts. So what we're going to talk about today in handling is the back of the car. And we're going to talk about rear geometry. Now, I look at geometry in a Mustang in 2 different types. In the front geometry is based off of what that tire footprint is doing through all the driving events around a corner. Braking, turn in, mid-corner, corner exit. In my geometry program, I look what's happening each one of those steps through there, and I make adjustments to try to get the absolute best footprint on the ground. Now, the back of the car is different. The back of the car is not turning anywhere. It's just following the front. So in the back, we're looking at geometry to improve grip and traction. Because the more grip you have, the better braking you have, the harder you get off the corner, and the harder you get off the corner, the faster you are down a straightaway. So let's kind of get into rear geometry. I want to start with, let's start with the upper control arm. Now, what I do with the upper control, let me back up a little bit. There's 2 important parts of rear geometry. The SVSA, which is the swing arm geometry, side view swing arm, that dictates what your anti-squat is. And anti-squat is defined. Anti-squat is how fast the car squats before it puts weight on the tires to get traction. So cars with little anti-squat will carl down quite a bit before it starts putting pressure down. a lot of anti-squat, they'll start pushing pressure down right away. And the other interesting thing about anti-squat is that it's also anti-lift. It helps keep the car down. So Mustangs have a big habit of popping up in the back under hard braking. Anti-squat helps keep the back down. And so we'll start with side view swing arm. And that side view swing arm is if you take the control arms and you kind of draw out where they can converge out in space. That's going to be your instant center. And the instant center is a relationship to, there's a line that goes from the bottom of the tire up through the center of gravity, and your relationship to 100% to negative to positive. And with a standard Mustang, when you lower them, the instant center ends up being kind of way out in space. But what I do is I make adjustments, specific adjustments to bring it back, and I kind of put it where I've had the most luck with it over the years. It's kind of my best compromise for street, strip, and track. And to do that, this is the upper control arm module that we do. Now it is a lot tighter piece than the factory one. And also, what I've done is the control arm is longer than factory, and this point is moved down. That's in order to kind of get where I'm looking for my side view geometry. The other thing, a couple things we do, this brings up another question. A lot of people ask why I do things different than so many other people. And I guess my best answer is, I don't know, I've been doing it for so long, I just kind of learn things, and the thing I like, I kind of keep. And I think from our perspective, the stuff we do, it's all the little things that we pay attention to that make a difference. For example, on this, I don't know if you can see it or not, but you can't really see the rod end. You can't see the rod end because on either side there's a little thing called Seal-Zits. Now, I thought because that rod end is way up in the car and it's going to be almost impossible to clean, that we put a Seal-Zit on it to keep dust and dirt out. So that's just one of the little things that I do. And also, you notice that the control arm is curved, or everybody else is straight. Well, something we found early on a lowered Mustang, if you hit some pretty big bumps, the control arm wants to crash into the body. So all we did is just make a nice little bend to it so it never hits the body. The other half of the side view geometry is the axle brackets. And here's our axle bracket, and you notice I moved the pickup for the control arm about 4 inches. I think it's 2.5 inches down. And what that does is it brings the control arm from, kind of brings it up a little bit because we want that pointing sort of up so it intersects with the upper control arm. And here's an interesting thing about axle brackets. We were the first company to bring axle brackets to the market. Gosh, I'm thinking 1990 maybe, 89, 90. And from there, I mean, everybody and their brothers copied them. And on the 197 Mustangs, the popular things to be with a whole bunch of holes and this bar that kind of comes up to the back of the axle, which I never really did like. So I have a much simpler design. And this part right here, there's actually a 12 millimeter nutsert right in the axle at that point. So we put a 12 millimeter bolt in there because when you're using this thing back here, I mean, there's always the opportunity for that to bend a little bit. But when you're using bolt right to there, all of a sudden you've got it locked so it's not going to go anywhere. So it's pretty simple, but pretty effective. So that's the side view. And I'm not going to tell you exactly where I put the instant center, but I'm going to tell you it's where I like it the most. I don't want people to copy it because everybody copies pretty much what we do. It's been like that over the years. Okay, the next part of the geometry of the side view is the control arms. This is our aluminum control arm, and a couple things you'll notice is different from everybody else. First of all, it's a 5/8 rod end. Everybody else wants to use a great big 3/4 inch rod end. And two things. While I went to the 5/8, number one, we use a super heavy duty, the JMX rod ends, which in most cases are stronger than a lot of the 3/4 inch rod ends everybody uses. Also, this is less than half the weight of everybody else's control arm with the 3/4. And then you're going to notice, wait, there's different ends. The different ends for a real significant reason. If you're underneath your S197, you're going to notice that the control arms splay out at the front. Okay, I don't like that, and for a simple reason. If you look down at plan view and you look at those with a splay and you draw them to a point of convergence, which is way behind the car, and then draw that through the roll center, that's kind of like your suspension roll axis, and that's kind of like pointing up in the air, and that's not really what we're looking for. So by offsetting bushings, we're taking the front of the control arm and moving it in, and the back of the control arm moving out. So now we have parallel control arms. Every single race car I've worked on over the years has parallel control arms, just simply because that's the best way to get geometry. And when we have parallel control arms, there is no point of convergence, which means your point of convergence is infinity. And if it's infinity, then the suspension roll axis is going to be parallel to the control arm. Some more little tricks we do. I don't know if you can see this, but a little rubber O-ring, like that. Because we get this so close, with a real small bushing on this side, that's what I call a anti-rattle ring, just in case the rod end wants to like slide over, so it doesn't hit on the axle or the chassis and make noise or rub. So that's kind of like something we do nobody else does. I also, just in recent months, some people have sent me some information that there are other suppliers in the aftermarket are now using offset bushings. Be interesting to ask them if they know why they're offset. Okay, now we're talking about roll center. And the roll center is the point in the back of the car that wants to roll around. And in a Mustang, it's up in the middle of the axle. And you can pretty much feel it in the stock Mustang going around the corner. You feel that inside tire kind of roll up. And you can also feel a lot of extra weight and load going on the outside front tire. By bringing the roll center down, the car doesn't want to roll up as fast or as high, which means you don't have to wait to get back to the throttle. The biggest problem with a live axle Mustang going around a corner is you've got to be patient and wait till you've got enough weight back on both tires so you can get to the gas. You get to the gas too soon, you got still too much load on the outside tire, and you overwhelm it and the car gets loose, which everybody knows about Mustangs getting loose. By bringing the roll center down, it isn't going to roll up as much, so you actually get back to the gas sooner. In the front geometry, I bring the roll center up, which we'll talk about in another session. And the front geometry, by bringing the front up and the back down, all of a sudden the whole plane that the car wants to roll around is far more level than it was like this. So it not only takes extra load off the front, but it helps the front turn. And again, you get back to the gas a lot sooner. So how do we get the roll center down? We talked about this a little before, in that the roll centers where the panel bar crosses the center line of the car. And we also had some questions again about Watts links. And Watts links are a good way to locate an axle. However, where that pin is for the bell crank is where your roll center is. And just due to the nature of the bell crank, there's only so far you can lower that. And you can't get it all the way down where I like it to be. Like in Trans Am, what we used to do is put the Watts link horizontal on the bottom of the differential, because it was easy, because it's called an underslung chassis. The chassis actually was underneath the axle, so it's really easy to just go straight across and locate the Watts link. That is a little impractical for the average guy to do in his garage. So what we do is we just move it down in the car. This kind of gives you an idea how far down it goes. This is the original. And this is the bracket that goes onto the chassis side of the car, the passenger side, and it just actually slides right up in, and then that's the only hole you have to drill, a little 7/16 locator. And we bring the handlebar all the way down, and there's only 2 holes, and that's only, you just choose whichever hole gets the handlebars the levelest. I mean, it's not going to be perfect, but whatever one gets the levelest. If they're both close, use the bottom hole, because that brings it down. And then on the axle side, we've got this bracket that kind of slides up on there, and again, it brings it down. So that's the roll center, and we'll do more in the 5-day course. Now I want to show you a couple of little tricks. Now we've got our aluminum control arms with steel rod ends. Something we do to every one is, I don't know if you can see that, but there's anti-seize on there. Anything that we have with a rod end that's going to be adjustable is anti-seized before it leaves. And that's just so that nothing seizes up in the future and it's easy to turn. So I'm going to screw this back in. And now we get questions on how to adjust the rear control arms. Well, again, I've got a super sophisticated piece of equipment that I'm going to show you. Now we don't get seasick to touch it down. There we go. Yeah, now see it better. This is nothing more than a stock control arm with two 14mm bolts through it. Now in this case, I'm going to use the spacers that we use for 5/8 rod ends, and just put it on one side and screw it until it drops into place. Tighten your jam nuts, and you've got your control arm adjusted to the correct length. Now, something I always recommend is all our control arms come pre-adjusted, so you don't have to worry about this. You just kind of bolt them on. But even so, after it's in the car, get you back up here. After it's back in the car, I strongly recommend after about a couple hundred miles to go ahead and double check the jam nuts. In fact, anytime you're doing anything on a car with like suspension, a couple hundred miles, you want to go through and do a complete nut and bolt check. Make sure nothing's loosened up, and also make sure the jam nuts are tight, because they have a tendency to loosen up. Okay, what are we up to? Okay, this is the prep sheet that we sent out last week. There's a link to it in the Speed Therapy Society, and this is kind of a setup sheet that you can use to just go through your car. And seeing as everybody's spending a lot of time home, this is a really good time to go through your car and do some checking. And this is a real general one I've had for years, and nobody really sent in and said, hey, it says right here to inspect and clean the sway bar links, the sway bar bushings, and sway bar bolts. We don't use rear sway bars. So that was for you to see if anybody was sharp enough to see that we had the wrong thing on there for S197. Now, other cars, SN95, IRS cars, yeah, there's a rear sway bar on that. A little bit on the 5-day workshop, what we're going to try to achieve, and kind of try to teach you as much as I can. In the first day is kind of like the first crucial step is performance planning, and all the things you need to think about in performance planning. Day 2 is building the performance foundation. We're going to talk about handling suspension geometry. Day 3, building the performance platform. Part 2, brakes, wheels, tires, cooling, and safety. And day 4, we're going to talk about adjustments and kind of dialing your car in. And day 5, we're going to do some tips and tricks and also answer questions. So that's the tentative layout. Of course, everything is subject to change because sometimes they go long, sometimes they go short. So I think I actually got through everything today. Have I missed anything? Do we have any questions coming in?
Yeah, we have some questions.
Questions.
Ask for questions.
Okay, we have some questions. Anybody that's got opportunity time to drink my coffee? Christopher, any recommendations for torquing jam nuts? Well, it's really hard to get a torque wrench on a jam nut. My suggestion is snug. You know, not Godzilla, don't super jam it, just get it nice and snug, because you still got to get it off sometime. And if you get them jammed too tight, then all of a sudden it might be really hard to get off. So just a good solid snug, and I know that's pretty ambiguous, but I think you can feel it as you start to tighten it. You know, you get contact, a little bit of push, and that should be snug. And who else do we have?
Thomas actually can read this.
Tim. Roll center discussion is above my pay grade, but to see the pants feel of getting back to the gas in the corner is great. Not to mention I can't read. It's not coming up enough. Oh, not to mention the gold color links. Yeah, this is gold anodized on aluminum, which I think is really attractive. But yeah, it's like the roll center is. I'll try to go back and kind of do a little more detail. The roll center is the point of the back of the car wants to roll around. So just think of it rolling up. Now, when it's high in the axle and it rolls up, you can feel the inside tire come up in the air and get light. When we bring it down, because we brought it down like 4 or some inches, when it rolls up down here, it's rolling up at a far lower rate at the wheel, so the car doesn't want to roll up as much, and it stays flatter on the ground. So just think of it as roll center high, rolls up, roll center down, doesn't roll as much. So the axle stays flatter, and that's how you can get to the gas sooner. Because I mean, when I drive, I'm typically into the gas well before the apex, and typically just flat on the floor at the apex and just hauling ass out of the corner. Because the faster you are mid-corner and corner exit, the faster you're going to be at the end of the straightaway. And that's how I can pass so many like high-powered cars on the straightaway. Thanks, Christopher. I like the anodizing too. 80 Fox body with a torque arm. Okay. Starting point for spring rates for a torque arm. I have zero personal experience, first-hand experience with torque arms because, as I explained before, I don't like them. It adds, I mean, they work really well for a forward bite. My issue with them is there are 2 things. One, it adds a whole bunch of mass, unsprung mass to the axle. But secondly, it's hard to get super deep late braking, just because unless you can decouple the torque arm from the chassis, it does some strange things. And I've never gone in to look what the real mechanics of it is, but I can tell you that I was driving a customer's car at Putnam one time. They had a couple of our cars, and they had some Firebirds and Camaros. A couple of guys would rent a track and take about 6 or 8 cars. And they always took so many cars because one of them would break, so they just jump into another one. And as I was driving, I think it's a Firebird Camaro, I can't remember which, going into the really tight turn at Putnam, I did what I normally do and just waited and just stood on the brakes. And before I even got to the corner, all of a sudden the back of the car is jumping all over the place. And so I got around the corner, started to drive, I hear the clunk, clunk, clunk. So I pulled in the pits, and what happened is the torque arm actually pulled itself out of the front mooring and was flopping around. So, I mean, torque arms are really good for a forward bite. They're not as good as a 3-link or a 4-link for braking. And with a 3-link or 4-link, I got more ability to adjust things. As far as spring rates, like I said, no first-hand experience. If it's a Fox, I would start with something like the Motorsport 5300C springs. I think they're like 650 pounds. I mean, years and years ago, that was our go-to spring on the Fox Mustangs. And unless you've got coilover, if you've got coilover, maybe 225, 250, because you don't want to go stiff. You want to go soft on an autocross track. Just like on road racing, on really fast tracks, we want to use a high spring rate. On slower technical tracks, we want to go down on spring rate. Now this, I'm just guessing. I mean, the best thing to do is just test, trial and error. That's how you learn about your car. You do this and you write it in your notebook. You change spring rate, what's spring rate, and you drive it and say, well, that's better. You write that in there. Maybe you want to try to go up a little bit more. Oh, that's better. Write that down. Go up a little more. Oh, the wrong way, and you back up. So, I mean, dialing in a car is nothing more than trial and error. And the more you do it, the more informed decisions you can make based on experience. So I'm sorry I couldn't be more helpful. But, gosh, I think that's a place to start. If you 5300Cs or 600, or I think I'd have to check if any of our suppliers have any higher spring rate for on control arm. And then, like I say, 250 maybe. on the front control arm, and then just if it's a coilover, then you can pop springs on and off, and just try them. You know, make one run with one spring rate, another one with another, and then just see how it all works. What else do we have?
Do you see questions?
Yeah, don't understand Christopher's though. He used to sell a diff that I remember, right? Maybe still do, and which I'm not sure. Maybe it's the
Which one is Why don't we go on to another one and we'll answer Christopher next week.
well, why don't you send some more information and I'll answer that next week. For SN95, you suggest using a panner bar with an adjustable four-link. The answer is yes, sort of. It just depends on the geometry of the four-link. The interesting thing about panner bar on SN95 is actually, again, we were the first company to put a panner bar on the Mustang. This is back in the 90s. And what we use the panner bar for is not to locate the axle, but to bring the roll center down. Because with the double splay control arms in a Fox SN95, the rear roll center is like way up in the car. So we use the panner bar to bring all the way down. And another something interesting about the panner bar is panner bars, passenger side to driver's side, work best for left turns, like going around circle track. For going right hand, it's better to go driver's side to the axle on the passenger side. Now, when we were doing this, first did this panner kit back in another 90, something like that. The guy that was working for me is a circle track guy. So before I could even get to him, I can't remember, I was gone or something, he already had the panner bar going from passenger side to the axle side to driver's side. So, okay, we'll leave it there. I think you've noticed just about every other panner that's come to market has the passenger side chassis and the driver's side axle, even the S197. You know, I would prefer it to go the other way. If we ever do another suspension for the S197s or Fox, we're going to have the panner bar go on the other way because that's best for clockwise turns. Okay, my opinion on parallel versus angled four-link. With a parallel, well, first of all, what the angle does is the angle is used for axle location. You've typically got one set of controllers going that way, another going that way, so that it's self-centering. You run into it when I won't get too deep into it. It's all about geometry. When you've got the double splayed rear end, then figuring the geometry to get it to work right is far more difficult than parallel. With parallel, everything is so straightforward. It's just a dream. That's why when the S197 came out and I saw a 3-link was on the back, I was doing this because I knew I could work with that really, really well. So it's all about geometry. The Fox SN95s, we put the panner bar on. That was a double splay, and the reason we didn't bring it back into production when we brought up all our other products back is because what we ran into is, okay, I said it's a double splay and that's self-centering, and we used the panner bar to bring the roll center down. We had a lot of people that didn't read the instructions and didn't adjust the panner bar correctly. In that situation, the panner bar had to be absolutely dead neutral as far as preload. When the car's on the ground, it should be able to slide the bolts in and out with no problem. What people would do is they wouldn't have it adjusted like that, and they'd actually have it too long or too short. And in that case, what's happening is you've got the panner bar fighting with the 4-link to center the axle, and we had a lot of broken pieces and issues because people didn't have it just right, and it would just break things. So just because of that, we haven't brought that back because it ended up being such a hassle. The other thing on the Fox especially is at that time there were so many different exhaust systems, and it's a really tight fit back there. And I think we had maybe 4 or 5 different panner kits for the back, and every one of them would hit a little bit, and it just was such a pain to try to do something. Everybody had a different exhaust system and one of that, and it was just too much. So we'll do something in the future. It's probably next year. I want to try to bring a 4-link to market for that, but that's a ways off. Best diff money can buy, the one you can afford.
I think he's responding to somebody
Oh.
else. That was Brad. Okay, here is a couple more questions that you're not seeing.
Okay.
These came through before. See, one is where is the roll center where is the roll center usually on an IRS car, specifically SN95 New Edge?
That's a good question. I can tell you that when I started doing geometry on the IRS, I don't remember where the roll center was. What I can tell you is we do a modified carrier that we eliminate the rear mount in the back and just make that straight bolt to the frame rail. But I move all the other pickup points, and the new roll center that we have in that is about, it varies. It's around, I'm going to say 1 3/4 off the ground, somewhere in that range. So it's pretty darn low, and that's why our IRS car is just handled like they're on rails. And also when I do the geometry, I within the architecture provided, I try to increase camber gain when I can. So as I try to increase camber gain, I try to add some anti-squat, which is really hard to do in a IRS car. Easy in a live axle, hard in IRS. That's why you go drag racing, live axle, track racing, or pleasure driving, IRS. So the new roll center we use is about 1 3/4. Man, this is a long time ago. It's like 2001 we did this. I think maybe, gosh, I'm gonna have to go back and see if I can find that in my notes. I mean, I got hundreds of pages of geometry. But I would have to guess it was up higher, and we brought it down. But I'll check on that for you. Okay, what else have we got? Let's do a couple more.
I have another one on diffs. Okay, if you're ever going to talk about differentials, and curious what you think about the Torsen.
Okay, am I ever going to talk about differentials? Yes, that'll be in the 5-day. What do I think about it? Torsen, we use it in everything we do. We started using them in the IRS cars back in 2001, and every IRS car we do has a Torsen. All the new cars that we build, we put a Torsen in it. And for those that don't know what a Torsen is, instead of having like friction plates in the differential, like posi traction, it has a series of worm gears, and they're arranged in such a way that the torque from the engine will actually go to the tire that has the most traction, which is kind of cool because that's where you want it to go, and it'll switch it back and forth depending on where the traction is. So I mean, a Torsen is absolutely the best differential to use, but here's a caveat. What we discovered on the S197s, we first started, it was a number of years ago with a Torsen, is that when we go to our full rod end rear suspension, all of a sudden there's no extra movement. It's really precise. It reacts very quickly. And what we found, and this kind of drove me nuts till I figured it out, is under hard braking, we got kind of this wiggle in the back of the car. And, oh man. So I kept pulling back from the pits. We checked everything, nothing was loose, and happened again, checked everything, nothing is loose. Finally, what I figured out is that because there was no give in anything, it was so precise that the Torsen under braking was having a difficult time figuring out which tire had the traction, so it kept switching the torque back and forth. The newer, the R Torsens, I believe, cure that. And the differential that we found that we used was the Wave Track. And the reason that what makes the Wave Track different is it has kind of like a cam that goes around it. So when it's gas off, it'll ride up on these cams and ride back. So that actually took the wiggle out. So there's some Torsen information. And we have, let's just do one more.
Just two more. Jim,
Two more.
Do you see this question here? Okay, first of all, Christopher was wondering if you had a checklist for the tools that you need for the prep list.
And that's a good question. A checklist of the tools that you need. As I mentioned early on, these are my old toolboxes back here. And this top box, I call that my go box. Everything I need to go to the track for a test day or even to go to a race where I can't take everything is in this go box. What you need to do is as you go through working on your car, I mean, you can make a list of what you need because every car is going to be need specific. So I think the best thing to do is go through and as you work on your car, see the tools that you need the most, and that should be in your go box. This baby has been to just about every major track in the country, many more than once. That's my education. That's my university back there is my toolbox.
Okay.
Oh,
This is
here's something cool. When I moved back here, I found. You're gonna say, "Well, it's just a key." Yeah, it's just a key. Except it's the key to the front gate of Road America when I was running the Skip Barber shop up there. I was the first one there in the morning and the last one there in the evening. And I felt that my duty, I had a little Porsche back then, and I just felt that my duty before I left in the evening, just kind of do a little, go around the track once, just to make sure everything's okay before I locked up for the night. So here's a little side story.
I'm going to invite to the speech therapy
Nope,
and
speed-
the workshop.
Again, sign up for the speed therapy and the workshop. It's going to be. I'm going to try to give as much information as I can from what I've learned over the years, and hopefully by some of the things that I can share with you, I can save you some time, save you some money, save you some headaches, and also try to be a little entertaining in the meantime. And again, thanks, Mike, all those Celine guys. Woohoo, Celine.
One more question.
One more question.
Okay, Jim Griffith. He came in late, but he's wondering how low the front suspension can be set on a McPherson front. And if what he's read is that it can't be lower than an A-arm level.
Huh.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's kind of a. I'll try to repeat that again. How low can a front suspension go? McPherson strut, and it can't be lower than.
He's read that it can't be lower than an A-arm level.
It can't be lower than an A-arm level,
With the ground causes problems.
or it causes problems. Okay, this is another case of be really careful what you read. I mean, I tell people really kind of stay away from a lot of these forums. I gave up on them years ago. I mean, the information that's handed out is oftentimes just not right. It's inaccurate or incomplete. What it boils around in is front control arm. It's not about how level it is to the ground. It's where the geometry is. Now, how it's going to look when the car is on the ground, if it's got a standard ball joint in it, it's going to look one way. If it's got our lower control arm from a front grip kit, the ball joint is lower, which means we lower the ball joint down, which brings the roll center up. It's kind of all around, front roll center. When a Mustang gets too low with McPherson strut stock suspension, the roll center, kind of dives way below ground, and that's why we try to pick it up. To me, I'm more about what the ride height is and what the geometry is. And another little trick, because we'll talk about this more, is ride height. Everybody measures ride height differently. I'm a simple guy. We check ride height at the fender lips. You go from the ground through the center of the wheel to the bottom of the fender lip, and that's where we measure the roll center, or the ride height. And it's so easy, so straightforward. It's a constant point that moves up and down with the car. So as we get into that, then we'll talk more about ride height. That'll come in the 5-week or the 5-day course. And Carrie said we need some thumbs up for Cars and Coffee. That helps us spread the word out further. And I got one more thing to read.
Oh, where to sign up for the speed
Oh,
therapy?
where to sign up for speed therapy.
It's on Facebook.
It's on Facebook.
And it's a group?
And it's a group. You like this? I should have like TV guys have like something in my ear so I can say, 1 minute please. So yeah, it's a group. We decided to do a private group because it gives us far more flexibility in communication, and we kind of don't run into a lot of the Facebook things that there are in regular Facebook. So sign up for the Speed Therapy Society, and it's on the Facebook.
On Facebook?
On Facebook,
There's a lot of information in there.
A lot of information, and we've got a lot of people sharing information in the group, so it's getting really cool. We've got some cars, and that's where Tim Tomasak shared the picture of his rear grip kit and told everybody just how well it works. So that's not me telling you how well it works. That's somebody that's actually got it on their car. So I think, well, we've gone long. You're standing in front of my clock. Yeah, oh, we've gone way long. That's okay. That's okay. We had a lot to talk about. And listen, I really appreciate you guys showing up. I think our little group is growing every week. I hope I was informative and tried to share some of my experience of over the years, and hope you took notes. Get your notebook. By next week, I expect everybody to have a notebook with multiple dividers in it, and you can take notes on what we talk about. So, well, until next time, keep the shiny side up, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.